Welcome to the Athlete's First Performance Podcast. This podcast is focused on providing evidence-based information for human performance and sports medicine professionals. On this episode, I had Trevor Lomax on to talk about performance nutrition for the injured athlete. Trevor is a registered dietitian and is board certified as a specialist in sports dietetics, as well as being a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Trevor has worked in Division I athletics, the Toronto Blue Jays organization, and currently works with the Army's H2F program. Trevor is a wealth of knowledge, and if you're working within a human performance team as a physical therapist, strength coach, or even an athlete or soldier listening to this and trying to improve your recovery, this episode's for you. Trevor, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for hopping on.
Thanks, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, for sure. I'm super excited for this. I know every time that we talk, I always learn something new, and I think the listeners will really get a lot of information regarding performance nutrition for the injured athlete.
Cool. Hopefully I can provide something useful and I don't just talk about myself the whole time.
No, it'll be good. All right. So before we get into the nitty gritty, why don't you just give us a little background about you, like where you're from, where you went to school, and so on.
Yeah. So born and raised in Virginia, Northern Virginia specifically, about 45 minutes south of DC. Grew up super unathletic until I got to like high school. Would call myself a late bloomer. Played lacrosse. I was a goalie, so I really got my butt handed to me all the time, let's say. And then went to college and I was studying computer science. Actually, I enjoyed it. You know, it was okay. I feel like it just wasn't my calling, and eventually found dietetics. Switched to dietetics because I realized all I was doing was spending my time in the gym, and then afterwards figuring out what I could eat to make the most gains. For reference, my mom was a bodybuilder through like the 70s ish, kind of before like steroids really entered the women's scene. She's a very natural bodybuilder. There's still pictures of her hanging in her gym at home. She's a personal trainer now. So that's the kind of environment I grew up in. So yeah, after I would work out, I would just be, searching on bodybuilding.com and trying to figure out what was going to help me build the most muscle. Once I switched to dietetics, I just went all in. Of course, dietetics is very medical focused. So I didn't love every class that I had, especially some of the other ones like life cycle development, where you're talking about like breastfeeding and geriatrics. But, I guess we'll talk later about how that's all come full circle. But yeah, so after I went to James Madison for undergrad, went to Florida State for grad school. While I was there, mostly bodybuilding and just working out in a gym. And that was really like my whole main focus. After that, I did a rotation for my internship at University of Wisconsin-Madison with the football team and a little bit of volleyball and wrestling. So that was really cool exposure. And then after grad school, I went to University of Virginia and I worked there as a sports nutrition intern for 1 year. Again, mostly with football, a little bit with baseball, and actually the squash team that they have there, believe it or not. And that was 2020. So things, of course, got rocky. There were like 3 months where I didn't even go to work. I was just at home making like Instagram content. I was kind of coaching some people on the side as well, just for general fitness. And then after 2020 cleared up, 2021, I went to the Toronto Blue Jays and I was working in their minor league system for a year. Did a little bit with MLB, but it was mostly just like spring training, helping the MLB dietitian. But yeah, I was in the low A baseball, traveling around Florida in the Florida League. It was a lot of fun. But it was grind culture. It's a lot of work. And I just realized it just wasn't for me. That's when I switched over to tactical. And yeah.
No, that's awesome. You've definitely had a lot of cool experience in some high performance teams. As a registered dietitian, what are the requirements in terms of like hours that you need during school? Because I think there's a
Yeah.
big misconception in like the performance and health space regarding like a registered dietitian versus like a nutritionist. So can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody can call themselves a nutritionist. So you right now can say, "Hey, I'm Dr. James Otto, the nutritionist." You know, your mom can call herself a nutritionist. Your best friend, your dog, if they can speak, can call themselves a nutritionist. There's no actual requirements for that title, no like legal protections or anything. Dietitian, they need a 4-year bachelor's degree in typically dietetics. They've just switched the requirements, and now you do need a master's degree in something related. Nutrition, or mine specifically is in exercise physiology. And then you have to do a 1,200-hour internship, supervised practice. Most of them have 3 rotations: clinical, food service, and community, which can just be a smorgasbord of different things. But my internship at Florida State also had a sports experience, 400 hours in that. So it was a 1,600-hour supervised practice internship. And then after that, you have to take your credentialing exam, which arguably is a really tough exam. Honestly, that was a harder exam than my CSSD or my CSCS. So that's the whole journey. And once you complete that, you're a registered dietitian, and then you can go and get things like your CSSD, which is certified specialist in sports dietetics, after about 2 years and some specific experience in sports, which is the path I went.
Yeah, I think that's really important for athletes and physical therapists, strength and conditioning coaches to understand like the extensive schooling that you've had. Because
Mm-hmm.
before I met you, I didn't realize all of the schooling and experiences that you need to be in this position. And I think a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
can get caught up just looking at people online and following their guidance that don't have the extensive schooling and training that someone like you has.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of gurus out there, especially nutrition. It's not as protected as medicine or even physical therapy. So yeah, there's a lot of people speaking on it who they may know some things here and there, but there's a lot of fluff associated with those people. A lot of things that they think you need to do that don't really have that much effort or much effect or efficacy behind it.
Yeah, for sure. So you were in high level sport. How did you find your way into working with the Army H2F program?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a colleague of mine was a colleague of ours, I should say, was headed to the tactical space into this H2F program. I had heard about it previously. I believe in 2020, I'd heard about it a little bit, and I was super interested. We had a presentation in grad school about tactical, and I just thought it was super cool. And the other thing that really interests me was having a life outside of my job. And in sports, you don't really get that. So when I heard that tactical, you have more of a normal work day, 9 to 5 type of thing, where you get your weekends, and you don't have to be at the mercy of your players, especially in some high performing institute organizations. So that really, really interested me. So when my colleague moved over from baseball, I was invited to come along, and I decided to make that move. And probably one of the best decisions I made. I think also another big part of it for me was kind of having some substance behind my work in sports. I like sports. I like watching sports. Don't get me wrong, but for me, it's entertainment, and I want to do something that was a little bit more passion driven for me, or I felt like had more substance behind it. And I feel like working with the U.S. military was one of those things, and people who dedicate their lives to service for sure.
For sure. I think that's a lot of people on our team kind of felt the same way. They've been in
Mm-hmm.
that sports world and just needed to change and found a lot of fulfillment working with our current population. So a question that I haven't really asked you, but do RDs have more autonomy working in the military versus like the private sector or sports?
Hmm. I think that's really just going to be dependent on who your supervisor is. Like where we work, I have a ton of autonomy from our supervisor, and that's great. I think if you work in the collegiate setting or professional sports, it just depends on who's over you. Some people are going to want more control and be more micromanagey, and in other high performing organizations, it's going to be the opposite. You're going to have a lot of autonomy. So I really just think it's where you are and what the culture is, and those things that matter more than actually just being a dietitian and in tactical or whatnot.
Yeah, I think that something that was a big difference for me coming into the military population is being able to order imaging in labs.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's new for dietitians in military versus like a sports world?
Yeah, I would say same answer as before. I mean, it just depends on where you were. Where I was before, no, we didn't have those privileges. A lot of that was up to the sports medicine staff. It was something we were fighting for at the time, but as at the time of my leaving, we hadn't had it yet. So um, it just again, it depends. There's some colleges or pro organizations where dietitians do have that privilege, and it just I think a lot of it depends on how long that dietitians have been at that institution, or maybe the buy-in they have, how athletic directors or high performance directors feel about dietitians. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it, but it's really nice having a little bit more medical privilege here in the Army, because as a sports dietitian, you don't get a ton of that when you're actually in sports. Maybe you'll have somebody with type 1 diabetes, or maybe you have somebody with a gluten allergy, but for the most part, it's performance nutrition. Here in the Army, we do a lot more medical nutrition therapy and some other things as well.
Yeah, I think it's convenient for the people that we work with because they don't have to shop around or go to a whole bunch of different providers. They can just see whoever they need to and they can get whatever they need done for them versus having to go to a bunch of different specialists and people like that. So I think it's a lot more efficient once it gets dialed in.
Absolutely. I do agree with that.
Yeah. So let's get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty. We'll start big picture and then kind
Mm-hmm.
of hone in with a lot of the specific injuries that we're seeing right now with
Mm-hmm.
our current job. So, like big concept wise, what are some big blocks that every athlete or service member should know about nutrition and injury recovery?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we got to consider is like when we zoom out, what are really the goals of nutrition? Like, what are we trying to achieve with nutrition? Obviously, we're not going to be creating some exercise plans. That's your job, right? Maybe with a little bit of strength conditioning, but for us, we're looking to heal the injury first and foremost, right? That's probably our top priority. Potential wound healing in there as well. If maybe something broke the skin, or maybe there's like abrasion or something, and maybe the diet isn't sufficient enough to be able to have the resources to be able to heal that. Preventing muscle loss is one of the biggest ones as we look forwards towards the return to play. And especially if somebody has something like an ACL where maybe they are immobilized, just making sure that they have as much function as possible as they approach that return to play. And then maintaining body composition and as well their relationship with food. That's kind of a tough time for people when, big shock, whether they're an athlete or a service member, big shock to their career or to their perceived perception progression of what they're working on and what their goals are, and then all of a sudden they feel like, oh wow, I'm just going to go sit and do very minimal activity in the form of physical therapy. This is the worst, and I feel like I'm going to gain a lot of fat, I'm going to lose a lot of muscle. So how can we both mitigate those body composition changes but also ensure that they still feel good about the food they're consuming and still have purpose and aren't just restricting everything, which kind of snowballs into the entire problem with nutrition when we talk about recovery.
Yeah, you hit it right on the head. I know if someone's coming back from a major injury, one of the first things they worry about is just gaining weight because they're not as active. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something that you have to hit right away and just make sure they understand the role that nutrition plays in getting them back to where they need to be.
Absolutely. And I feel like this is a perfect segue to the first thing that I see is like the most important aspect of nutrition, if you don't mind that I transition. Um, and let me just preface this with there's a model that I follow. I know you've seen this from any talks that I've given at work. Is a nutrition pyramid is actually put together by a guy named Dr. Eric Helms. I believe he has a PhD in some kind of biomechanical exercise physiology thing. But I love him. He's a real jokester too. Got a great podcast as well. But I've listened to him for years, and he created this nutrition pyramid, and it actually was created for body composition. And he's a very big natural bodybuilder. So that was kind of his lens that he was looking through. But I just pretty much take this because when you zoom out and you look at nutrition, a lot of them really apply in this same manner. And it is a really easy framework for me as a practitioner to be able to use to communicate that information to service members or athletes. But also, I think it's easy for the service member, for the athlete to understand nutrition and really where their priorities lie in terms of what's the first thing I need to get under my belt before I worry about the really small nitty gritty details. But the first part of that is energy balance. And this goes along with what we were saying in that right after injuries, a service member or an athlete's not going to be moving around as much. But when it comes down to it, there's an energy demand in and of itself with injury recovery. And that's something that a lot of people don't consider. We usually say this is about 1.2 times your baseline energy needs, right? Like your basal metabolic rate times your exercise activity factor, which varies based on where they are in the recovery process. And then we multiply that again by another 1.2. And that generally is pretty good at determining how much energy we need to compensate for in terms of calories. So that way they can make sure they're getting enough energy for not only the, living, first off, second off, the activity they're doing, whether that's PT or maybe that's maybe they're deeper into the recovery process, but then also the actual healing of the injury itself. When we get the energy balance part of the equation down, which I know for a lot of our service members is a huge issue. For athletes, under eating is very common. It's because it's hard to get in enough energy, especially when you're moving a lot, or you have a giant football athlete who has tons and tons of muscle mass and just they walk 5 steps and they've burnt 500 calories, it seems. Once we get that down, that's usually if we think about filling up a jar, the old metaphor of filling up a jar with different things, those are the big rocks. You get your energy balance down and your body is really good. A lot of the things that it needs to do, they're going to sort themselves out. But this is the first piece of the puzzle, so to speak.
Like you said, a lot of our soldiers and clients that we work with, they don't have time to eat during the day. They're always busy and they just can't make it work. So what are some ways that you can help them, like either track their calories or make sure that they're getting as much as they need?
Yeah. Tracking is definitely one way. I would say for a lot of these service members and athletes I've worked with, it's not the best way. It's a little bit of a higher demand, higher accuracy for sure, but high demand and sometimes provides some mental stress in there as well. And so it's really just gauging what that service member is comfortable with. But a lot of it is just starting really basic. Like, are you eating 3 meals minimum in a day? For an athlete, that may be even more. For a larger person or human, that may be even more, 4 meals, 5 meals, and just trying to gauge it that way. And then once we take a look at, all right, how many, I like to call them opportunities, right? A meal or a snack. It's just an opportunity to get in some kind of energy or nutrient or something that we're seeking, at least at a very scientific level. When we talk about, psychosocial, then it becomes more than that. But at a very basic level, it's an opportunity. So we're making sure they're getting enough opportunities within the day to get energy in. And then from there, kind of zooming in and understanding what does each meal consist of? Are you super bro and you just want to have a ton of protein? Well, that's great. Like, we need protein for sure, but where's a lot of that energy coming from? Probably we need more from carbohydrates. Maybe we need some more from fats. And then we can start talking about micronutrient intake on top of that, vitamins and minerals and stuff like that. So in terms of energy balance, it's really just how's your opportunity throughout the day. When somebody first gets injured and they're not moving around a lot, especially when they're used to moving around a ton, they may not be as hungry. So how's somebody's appetite and how can we manage that? If it's low, can we get more liquid foods in, something that kind of digests quickly, gets through us so that we can get energy in and be hungry again? This is probably the only time where I would say maybe we need to pull back the fiber. If somebody eats quote unquote really, really healthy and has very high fiber foods, fiber is extremely filling. So if you're having a ton of fiber in the day, you may not want to eat as many calories as you need. Same goes with protein. Of course, we need protein for the healing process, but again, very satiating. So if somebody's having a super high protein diet, maybe to a point that's excessive, well, that may be hurting them when it comes to their actual energy balance throughout the day. So there's a lot of factors that play into it, and we can get really, really into some nitty gritty stuff. But I usually am looking at the big things, opportunities, and like what are the composition of those meals.
Okay, for sure. And how much does nutrient timing play into that as we keep on diving into this?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a step back. Let me talk about two other things, if you don't
Okay.
mind, and then I'll
Yeah.
get to nutrient timing because for me, in my head, it makes more sense when I phrase it this way. And also, if you Google Eric Helms pyramid, nutrient timing is one of those steps, but it does come after two more steps that
Okay.
I'd like to touch on first, just so everybody kind of you're getting an entry into my head and seeing
For
what I
sure.
how I visualize nutrition.
Yeah.
So, but that's absolutely super important. The second most important thing after energy balance is typically macronutrient intake. Really, this is just the distribution of the three major macronutrients that are providing energy. There's technically six major macronutrients, including alcohol, fiber, and water, but we really just talk about protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Within protein, carbohydrates, and fat, right? Essentially, they all have their own role. To keep it really, really simple, I could probably talk for 40 minutes on that alone. But protein, we think about it as building muscle, but it does a lot of other things. Helps with bone strength, helps with immune function, helps with even building some certain hormones, typically non-sex hormones that are utilized in our body. So ensuring that we're getting enough protein so that we can do the things our body normally needs to do. But also on top of that, we have this additional protein need depending on what our injury is, of course, but whether it's soft tissue, you have a musculoskeletal injury, or you have or I guess like specifically like a bone injury, all of those are going to require some level of protein on top of your normal daily needs. Protein, I talk about most halfway because I'm a total bro at heart, but halfway because despite there being such a large focus on protein intake in a sports population, or even with, I would say maybe like 25% of soldiers who actually like to lift and do those things, people still are really under consuming protein. Again, it's very satiating, so it's really hard to get enough, and it's expensive for the most part, especially high quality sources like meats. Like especially right now, like the grocery store I shop at literally has not had chicken breast for at least 2 weeks now, which is very infuriating. But even like ground turkey, ground chicken, a lot of the leaner sources, they're really expensive right now. Even if you look at beef, a 96% lean ground beef or 93% lean ground beef, they're so expensive right now. So I think people are kind of avoiding them to kind of save their pockets. But that's also one of the pieces, if you're injured, that you need the most. Um, Beyond that, I would address carbohydrate need because carbohydrates, again, are providing our high intensity energy. And a lot of times when you're injured, your body's stressed. So if you're stressed, you're going to be shifting your energy utilization to carbohydrates more so than fats, which at rest, we're typically utilizing fats. So if we're utilizing more carbohydrates, our demand for carbohydrates may be elevated. Of course, the hard part about nutrition is like, well, how does that balance with the reduced activity versus now we're a little bit more sedentary, plus you have this demand, so that's where things get a little tricky. But in America overall, I would say we generally consume a lot of fats, high fat diets, and especially inflammatory fats, which I'll get on into later if we have time, because man, I'm just going right now.
No, it's
I feel
good.
like
It's good.
I feel like I'm Eminem on Rap God,
Just
I just keep
going.
going.
Real quick on protein, what are
Yeah.
some easy ways that people can increase their protein? Like any tips and tricks
Mhm.
that you have there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one. Eat protein foods, but
Yeah.
really, it's just figuring out ways that you can make it cost effective, first of all, and then just making sure you're getting enough in each meal, right? If typically people, especially in America, eat very little protein for breakfast, they have a little bit more for lunch, and then for dinner they have these astronomical portions. right? They'll eat like an 8-ounce steak. And some people may need that for sure. But if we can distribute the protein better throughout the day, it gives us more opportunity. Again, right? Protein's super filling. So if we're eating a little bit more at breakfast, that'll give us a little bit more. And then we have a little bit more at lunch. Cool. And then we have some at dinner, right? Should be, pretty substantial. And then if we can fit some snacks throughout the day that also incorporate protein, that's really just going to add up. And then, of course, other foods do have a little bit of protein in them. So you got to consider that, right? If you have pasta instead of rice, you're going to get a little bit more protein. Is it substantial? Maybe like 6 grams more per serving, but like, hey, that might add up at the end of the day. Although it's not the most high quality protein, sometimes protein needs are hard to meet if you're a 300-pound lineman or something.
Yeah. Are you good with like protein shakes or even like chocolate milk? I know they
Mm-hmm.
didn't give us protein when I was playing in college football, but they had chocolate milk stored in the fridge. I feel like that's pretty common.
Yeah, and even these days in collegiate programs, you're going to see tons of different protein shake options. Professional sports, you probably see them too, depending on which sport and the regulations. But I'm cool with protein shakes being a supplementation as they're meant to be, meaning they supplement you being able to get in the amount of protein you need in the day. If they are a crutch, that's when where we need to discuss, hey, you could probably get something that has a little bit more nutrient diversity in it. But for the most part, yeah, sure. Throw a protein shake in there. It is a snack. Have it as kind of like a side when you're having a meal, especially if you're finding yourself getting so super full from actual protein type foods like meat. Yeah, throw a protein shake in there. Or you can make a protein shake with some more nutrient dense things where you're making a smoothie and instead of adding actual protein powder, you're adding in something like a Greek yogurt, for example. All those things will add up throughout the day and be able to help you hit it. Yeah, as long as it's not a crutch, I'm cool with it.
Good. And that brings me to the next thing. You sent me some notes on this pyramid, the micronutrients.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you talk to me about that? Because I've got some questions about like the anti-inflammatory stuff and things that I've seen in other programs.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot about anti-inflammatories these days. When we talk about micronutrient intake, I want to be clear. I mean, 3 separate things. There's 3 categories, I should say. First one's going to be vitamins. We've all heard of those. Minerals. We've all heard of those too, but maybe a little bit less so. And then there's a third category called phytonutrients. Essentially just means nutrient from a plant, mostly just things that can't be categorized within a vitamin or a mineral, but also provide some benefit to our body. I mean, there's tons of nutrients, right? Tons of vitamins, tons of minerals, and almost countless phytonutrients. And we're in this constant battle of trying to get them all in. Really, the best thing that you can do is diversifying your intake, whether that's the types of proteins you're eating, right? Every type of meat or low fat dairy that you consume is going to have a little bit different nutrient composition. But then also when we're talking about fruits and vegetables, which tend to be the bane of everybody's existence, who is either at least a collegiate athlete and for sure a service member, they all apparently hate vegetables for the most part, I say. And I get it. It's really hard to get in the amount of vegetables that you need in the day. Typically, we'd like to see soldiers or elite athletes consuming vegetables at every meal or fruits, right? So most people, I don't know, give or take, won't really consume vegetables at breakfast, but maybe they'd be willing to have some kind of fruit along with whatever they're having. And that could provide some carbohydrates as well. But really diversifying throughout the day. If we look at what, my favorite example is bodybuilders, just because I came from that, and also because they're very regimented, right? They're always consuming the same thing: chicken, broccoli, rice, chicken, broccoli, rice. All right, you can consume broccoli; it's absolutely great for you. I'm not hurting broccoli at all in this. But what about other colored nutrients, right? Like, can you have some beets? Can you have some different colored potatoes in there? Can you get in some greens and some oranges and some yellows, right? Every color is indicative of a different polyphenol, like something that's going to help your body in some way. So if you can just diversify the colors, if you're colorblind, I'm sorry, it makes it way harder. But for most, for normal vision people, am I discriminating by talking about that? I'm not sure.
Oh, you're good.
But yeah, just making sure that you're consuming a wide color, wide variety, different nutrients, even things that are white. I think people get that misconception, like white potatoes or onions. They don't have any nutrients. They're white. No, those have some nutrients too. So just diversifying amongst the things and trying to get in a lot of those is really going to be the easiest answer to making sure you get all of those without making it overly complicated.
Definitely, definitely. And I see in some of these notes
Mm-hmm.
talking about beets in terms of like improving blood flow. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that? When I was doing my sports residency working with hockey players, they would take beetroot juice and drink that
Mm-hmm.
before games to improve blood flow or endurance. Like, have you seen a
Yeah.
lot of that for performance?
Yeah, especially in collegiate, there's a lot of beetroot juice. If you've ever had beet juice, especially like the most popular brand Beet Elite, they're probably going to sue me for defamation after this, but it tastes terrible. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Personally, don't get me wrong, some people do like it, but I've had a couple different beet products, and I've never had one that I'm like, oh man, like that's really getting me going. Um, the data on is definitely supportive. It's widely used enough, and there's enough studies to prove that there's definitely efficacy to it. Would I ever do it? No chance.
No.
Just it's I'm not gonna it tastes bad and then it's sitting in my stomach and I just have that taste in my mouth while I'm working out. No thanks. But absolutely, it's helpful. The biggest thing about like a beet product that I've seen is just making sure that it actually works. There was one study done a couple years ago where they looked at different beet products and the content of them. So either they're working from nitrates or nitrites, and a nitrate and nitrite just slightly different chemical structure, but changes the essentially effect of how that nitric oxide is produced and thus improved blood flow. And then so some of the products that they looked at, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head which ones are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones, but some of them, the content was, as is or as stated, and then others were much lower, or the effect of those was much lower than they stated. And that just has to do with either the content of them or the form that it was in being, actually having that effect or not. So, again, that kind of goes with all supplements is you don't really know what you're getting. Third party tested is better for sure. But some of those products were third party tested and had the right content in them, but maybe didn't produce the effect that they're claiming. So um, that's the thing. Personally, I'd rather say just eat beets if you
Yeah.
like, if you could tolerate them. I love pickled beets. I hate beet
Hmm.
juice, but pickled beets I'll eat all day, and we'll just buy them from the store and just have them as like a little side for dinner. And there's a bunch of these beets, for example, improving blood flow. But another one we talk about a lot is anthocyanins. This is just like dark colored berries. Most people think of this as blueberries. Is an anti-inflammatory. So people are like, oh, just eat a ton of blueberries. Like, well, you can get them from other things too. But for sure, mixing up, like I said before, again, to keep it simple without knowing all the names in them and like what has them, just eat a wide variety, and you're sure to get some in. Um, and then one of our favorite ones that dietitians talk about a lot is tart cherries. They both reduce inflammation, but also they help people sleep. And sleep is such a low hanging fruit that so many people can improve to improve the recovery and injury process that, I mean, you can't go wrong with improving your sleep, especially if you are reduced activity and maybe are having trouble sleeping at that time. Tart cherries are one that we love to go to. Talk to any dietitian, they'll rave about cherry juice.
No, that's awesome. And I like hearing that because I make a berry shake almost every day,
Mhm.
put berries in my oatmeal in the morning. So no, I
You are
definitely like that.
so anti-inflammatory. I can
I
see
like
it
it.
through
I
the
mean, it
screen.
tastes good too. Definitely tastes good. I like it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk nutrient timing because I think this is one of the biggest questions that I get. So after like a
Hmm.
hard rehab session, someone just goes through an hour, hour and a half of training. They ask, what should I do next? Like, what do I need
Hmm.
to do in terms of getting this proper recovery? So can you talk on that?
Absolutely. I think it's funny when people go through physical therapy and then they're like all about it, but when they were training as an athlete and like in practice or their lifts with their strength coach, that there it's like a secondary thought. It's like, oh, whatever, I'll go eat later. But you should be treating physical therapy just as you would a training session where you're going and you're eating after. There's specifics about what you should eat when it comes to protein and carbohydrates, but I say just keep it simple. It's probably been a while since you had a full meal. especially, and I'll talk about pre-rehab meals before this, or after this in a second, but when it comes to post rehab recovery, just go and have a meal, have something that has protein in it, has some kind of carbohydrate, and it's preferably a whole grain. And then if we can also add in fruits and or vegetables or both, that would be like ideal. Maybe we get some healthy fats in there, specifically some, omega-3s would be great if we could. But that would be a perfect meal. Get in enough protein, get enough carbs, vegetables, and maybe a little bit of healthy fats, and boom, like you have a meal right there. That's going to do everything you need it to do without having to worry. And I usually tell people just, if you can, of course, it depends on the timing of your physical therapy session, but if you can just position one of your meals, whether it's lunch or maybe you have a later lunch or dinner after your physical therapy, then great. Like you're already set up to do the best thing that you can for your body. And one thing I also want to add on to that is when we think of nutrient timing, we think of like pre and post workout nutrition, but I like to think about nutrient timing as spread throughout the entirety of the day. There's a lot of people these days, especially zealots on Instagram and TikTok, who say you should just have one meal in the day, or you should, skip intermittent fast and skip breakfast and just have lunch and dinner. Like I said before, those are opportunities for you to get enough nutrients through the day, especially for elite athletes or service members who maybe have higher demands and that are harder to meet. But also just considering that the nutrient timing of protein is about 3 to 4 hours in which it really is providing you the biggest benefits. So if you can eat every 3 to 4 hours and re-stimulate muscle protein synthesis, then you're really going to get the most bang for your buck when it comes to either your recovery from an injury and your whole progression, or if we're talking about you're just trying to build more muscle or recover from an intense workout and get the most benefits from those. Spreading your nutrients throughout the day is really going to be your biggest bang for your buck. And I talked about that a little bit when I talked about the protein spacing throughout the day, how we're having too much for dinner and not enough for breakfast and lunch.
Yeah.
But I feel like, go ahead.
No, I think that's important. I know, like you've done blood flow restriction, you know how hard that is and how much of a pump you get.
Yeah, it
When I was
sucks.
taking the course, yeah, it definitely does. It hurts so good. Taking the course, they're like, yeah, try to get 25 to 30 grams of protein.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you can right afterwards, just to induce that muscle hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think you always hear, 20 to 30 grams, 25 to 35 grams. At the end of the day, speaking with a dietitian, finding your individualized recommendation, I would say it's whatever your protein needs throughout the day, split up, and then you just take one of those chunks and you put it right behind your physical therapy session. But yeah, you need a certain amount to get to what's called the leucine threshold, which is leucine, just an amino acid, specific one that tends to be the rate limiting amino acid for muscle protein synthesis. You tend to get there for most younger individuals between 20 to 35 grams or so, 25 to 35. That's why that's that typical recommendation. And for anybody listening who may have older patients, then the leucine threshold could be a lot higher. Of course, with older people, they typically eat less too, which makes it a lot more difficult, but the leucine threshold could be higher. So they may actually need more protein to reach that level. And when I say the leucine threshold, what I mean is when you get to a certain amount of leucine from a meal, the rate of protein synthesis becomes exponential, more than just a linear progression under that. So hitting that is really important if you really want to get the most out of your food.
I didn't realize that in terms of older folks needing more protein.
Mm-hmm.
I would not have thought of that. So no, that's really good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of PTs. I mean, they work in a sports setting. They're working with athletes, and then during the day, all those athletes are in school, so they're working with people
Mm-hmm.
that have knee replacements, things like that, where they're still training hard, get that muscle
Mm-hmm.
back, get that quad back. So no, that's awesome. I'll definitely
Mm-hmm.
make sure that my parents are doing that after their training.
Perfect, perfect.
Yeah.
And
Um,
then one
oh,
one
go
thing I
ahead.
also want to touch on is pre-rehab meals, right? Like a pre-workout meal. I think it's just as important to consider that because at the end of the day, your physical therapy is an exercise session. So if you take it seriously and just like you would have a pre-workout snack where you're trying to get in some carbohydrates, top off your energy stores so you can perform your best, you want to do the same thing with physical therapy. So I would say it's along the same lines as what you would consume during a pre-workout meal. You might just add a couple additional things like supplements specifically, if that's your prerogative. So the biggest thing would be carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates is our high intensity energy source. So if we're going to be doing some kind of intense exercise for our physical therapy, we need carbohydrates. Usually we say as a blanket statement, 30 to 60 grams, about 30 to 45 minutes before you begin your exercise, giving you some time to digest, and then also giving you enough to kind of top off those stores. Again, if you're working with 300-pound athletes, that may be different. You may need some more. And again, that scales to the population. And then we have in this population is probably one where you'd recommend having a little bit more protein than just a regular pre-workout meal. In a regular pre-workout meal, we're looking for very small amounts of protein, essentially just enough to curb our appetite while we're working out, 10, maybe up to 20 grams if they're a larger individual. But for the most part, pretty minimal protein. In pre-rehab, you may want 20 to 25 grams. So that way you have circulating amino acids in your bloodstream as you're bringing blood flow to the area that needs rehab.
I like
And
that.
then I think that's something people don't consider often. And then, of course, probably the number one supplement that people are talking about is collagen. Me personally, I'll probably, piss off a lot of dietitians, but I am not a big believer in collagen. I just don't think the studies right now are supportive enough of it. And I'll be outspoken, and somebody can prove me wrong, and I'm completely okay with changing my ideas if they can show me the data. But I just haven't seen enough right now. The preliminary study that really showed a huge effect was done in non-weight bearing athletes, and I believe it was mostly swimmers. And then they were jump roping. And it's like, if you take a swimmer and you jump rope, they're going to have got collagen synthesis because it's becoming weight bearing. So that was the one where they showed the most effect. But the good thing about collagen, especially if you're taking a third-party tested product, is there's really no downside. Like, it's not hurting you in any way. It's not giving you too much excess calories that could, negatively affect body composition. And so it's really like no downside, and you have a potential upside. So it's at some points, it's like, if you have the money to pay for it, or if you're in a collegiate setting or professional setting where that's being provided, why not just go for it? You would want a product that has vitamin C along with it, because that's really what's going to stimulate collagen synthesis. So that's definitely a big important factor. But a lot of the products these days have powdered vitamin C or ascorbic acid within them. So you don't really have to worry about it most of the time, unless you're taking like Bubs or whatever they sell at the grocery store. Again, I'm going to get sued for defamation, but that's cool with me.
No, I mean, I think I've asked you guys a couple times regarding collagen, because we do see a lot of tendinopathy, right? There,
Yeah.
our soldiers are running all the time. We see a lot of Achilles and patellar tendinopathy, and sometimes I just don't respond to like the isometrics or the heavy slow resistance training. So, no, it's definitely a hot topic. Like, I see collagen everywhere in terms of rehab stuff. So that's all. I always want to get the professional's opinion on that.
Yeah. And like I said, there's no downside. So if you got the money, do it. A lot of our service members, especially lower enlisted, who may not be making a lot of money, it doesn't seem like the biggest bang for their buck, or something that really makes sense for them. But yeah, like I said, you got the money. Why not?
Yep, for sure. I want to go back just a little bit in terms
Okay.
of talking like either rehab or pre-strength training meals, because everything in the Army happens early in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Start training at 0630. Some people are doing the rehab at that time during the reconditioning programs. How do you help soldiers understand the importance of eating that early, even though there's a lot of people that say they just can't eat breakfast or they can't wake up that early to eat?
Yeah, it's understandable, because sometimes, we have like a weird work day and then work a little bit later, and I'll go work out in the morning. So I try to feel for my soldiers, and I would put even elite athletes in the same bucket, right? Sometimes you're getting like a 5:30 a.m. lift before you got to go to class, and then followed up by practice. And everything counts, especially when your energy demands are that high. So number one, I would say eating the night before, like that food's still in you, right? So that's gonna help. So I may have a soldier have some high carbohydrate meal before they go to bed, of course giving them enough time for it to digest and settle, so that so it's not inhibiting their sleep, which would I would say probably be a net loss if their sleep suffered, but they had carbohydrates in them. Um, so that's one strategy that they can use. But really, what I'm pushing is finding something that they can have, or waking up a little bit earlier. Again, as long as it's not interrupting high quality, 7 to 9 hours or 8 to 9 hours of sleep. But if they can get up a little bit early and have something and kind of just, give it time to digest, great. If not, well, can we use something that's more easily digestible? Like even drinking something like a Gatorade or applesauce, which was a huge hit in college athletics. And yeah, I love those squeezy pouches of applesauce. You best believe.
Yeah.
So it's something like that can digest really easy, that really you don't really have to think about. And what I'm telling soldiers or athletes is, well, can you start drinking that Gatorade or have that applesauce as you're getting ready in the morning, or as you're driving to work if you have a little bit of a commute, and you can utilize that time rather than just sitting in your car listening to the Beastie Boys or something.
No, that's good. I never even thought about in terms of like what you're eating the night before, how that carries
Mm-hmm.
over to the early morning. Because I remember like 5 a.m. workouts in college, it's like I don't want to eat anything, but if you eat a
Yeah.
good meal the night before, that carries over. No, that's good to
Yeah.
know.
And I think also right now, especially with the media, like people are afraid of eating at night. They think, oh, 7 p.m. comes and I eat and everything goes to fat. It's not true, right? It's just when you're eating that late at night, you have a higher risk of going over your calorie balance for the day. So if you're going over your calorie balance and it's because of a meal late at night, then yeah, maybe eating late at night is the issue. But a lot of times it's not. At the end of the day, it's energy balance. So we have somewhere else in the day that we can figure something out or eat more satiating foods.
Good, good. Are we good with nutrient timing? Are we ready to move into supplements? Probably the most
Yeah.
common thing that you get asked about on a
Yeah.
daily basis.
Let's do it. Let's do it
All right,
before I
talk to
bang
me.
my head against the wall.
No, you're good.
So the supplements are the 1%, right? Like you got to do everything else at least pretty damn well before supplements are really going to take that much of effect to where it's worthwhile. But the one I have to talk about has my heart. I love it. So much research on it that it's undeniable. Is creatine. If you're not an elite athlete, or you can afford buying creatine, even if it's your grandma, like you should be everybody and their mother and grandma and sister and brother should be taking creatine, because I think there's enough evidence to show that it works in almost every facet of your body. And it's got a positive benefit. And there's no downside. Like if you take too much, maybe you get some GI upset, but you know, I've only seen that having people take up to like 30 grams or maybe in the 20-gram range, which, there are recommendations that do lead to taking that much, especially when you're talking about the brain benefits or the cognitive benefits of it. You may need to take that much in order to increase your brain creatine stores significantly enough, at least to see an effect. But yeah, creatine, everybody should take it. If you're injured, a lot of people stop taking it when they get injured because like, oh, I'm not really doing anything. No, like your body needs energy production in order to heal whatever injury you're going through. So creatine is probably even more important at that point to be taking. And it's really easy. It's really cheap. I mean, with inflation, everything's going up, but creatine is still one of the cheapest supplements. 5 grams every day for the rest of your life. No need to cycle. Just buy it from a trusted source, so you're not, eating heavy metals and other toxins. But for the most part, creatine all day, every day. Can't say enough about it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been taking creatine since I've been like 15, 16 years old,
Yeah.
like playing football. So I love
Mm-hmm.
it. It's cheaper than protein. What about like the preloading? So like when you first start taking it, do you have to take more than the 5 grams, or should you just be consistent with the 5 grams of creatine?
Yeah, the way I always phrase it is, what is your timeline? If it's injury and you haven't been taking creatine and you think it's beneficial to get up on creatine as soon as possible, then a loading phase I think is beneficial. Without it, you're fine. Like if you're just lifting and you're just trying to get bigger, or you're trying to improve your performance, and you don't really have like a short timeline that you need to be up on creatine, I would just go with a 5 gram dose. Number one, it's just helping you build the habit of just taking it every day. Take it at the same time, build it into a routine, make it easy. You don't really have to think about, do I need 20 grams today? don't worry about it. If you have a timeline, 20 grams for 5 to 7 days, your body will be up to saturation to where it's, working its its full potential. If you don't have a timeline, 5 grams, it may take 2+ weeks in order for your body to get up to the saturation level. But again, your tub of creatine is going to last a little bit longer, a little bit more cost effective. And if you don't have a timeline, it's going to get you to the same place eventually.
Definitely. Yeah, it's huge for the strength, performance, speed, power, all of that stuff. And concussion too. You
Mm-hmm.
talked about brain health, right?
Yep.
Super
Yep.
important for
Yep.
concussions.
Yep. It'll make you more resistant to concussions, meaning like you might still get a concussion, but maybe it'll be a little bit less severe than if you hadn't been taking creatine, or maybe your recovery timeline is going to be a little bit longer if you're not taking creatine. So I think there's definitely enough evidence to either be taking it, especially if you're in a high concussion probability sport like football or hockey or, my favorite, lacrosse. So
Yeah, definitely. And we could probably spend a whole podcast talking about that.
for
But what
sure.
else? What else do we have outside of creatine?
So outside of creatine, I would say there's three that I think, besides the creatine, I think with the creatine, four things that pretty much everybody should be taking because whether you're an athlete or a practitioner listening, or just, James's mom listening, you told me she listens, so now I'm shouting her
Yep,
out.
that's right.
So
That's right.
then you should be taking these for just general health. Omega-3 fish oils, it's really hard to get an adequate amount of them consistently without taking the supplementation. Number one is just the levels in like farmed fish, maybe decreasing. I've seen kind of mixed data of like, are they better? Is it just different composition? Blah blah blah. But 2 to 3 grams of fish oils every day, I really think most people should be taking for brain health, for heart health, for just general health. Zinc is a huge one. It's really hard to get enough zinc in the day. Zinc is typically coming from meat and protein containing foods. Oysters, for example, is the biggest source. And it's like, who's eating oysters every day? No chance. So supplementing with zinc will help your immune system. And if you're healthy and you don't get sick, then you can train and you can recover. Training when you're sick, even if you can do it, either you're making your sickness worse or you're not being able to put in 100% effort. So the only problem is, your sick days at work, they're going to build up really fast and they're never going to go away. I need to find a
Yeah,
way to use those.
yeah. Carry them over.
And then the last one is magnesium. Magnesium, the main thing that I'm looking for from this is improvement in sleep, whether it's sleep quality or sleep latency, being able to fall asleep more quickly. But taking magnesium specifically in the form bisglycinate or glycinate is probably the most accessible, cheapest to get. There's a ton of forms. But if you get the wrong form, like if you get citrate in a bottle versus citrate in a pill, the citrate in a bottle is used as a laxative. Magnesium oxide or stearate is also used as a laxative. So if you don't want to be pooping your pants, make sure you read the bottle before you buy it. And then, there's other supplements out there, but I would say if most people are taking those, you're good. After that, a lot of things are fluff. Tongue-cat Ali is a big one that people are talking about right now. There's no data to support it's helpful. I mean, I could go on about the crazy stuff I hear.
No, I think that's that's really easy to use. It's four things. And before I
Mm-hmm.
met you, I didn't know about zinc and magnesium. That's something that I've
Mm-hmm.
incorporated over the past year, and I've definitely noticed a big difference, especially in the
Mm-hmm.
sleep, because we wake up so early to get to work. So
Oh yeah.
I think the magnesium definitely helps.
Yeah, I know when I run out of magnesium and I have a couple of days, like you don't really see like, oh, my sleep sucks the next night. But like over the next couple of days, you're like, oh, I'm kind of sleeping worse. And then you take it again, you're like, oh my God, it was the best night of sleep of my life.
Yeah, definitely. And so, like for me, I'm not really telling people about zinc and magnesium. I
hmm
usually refer them to you guys. But how are people resistant to get that stuff? Or are they more
Uh,
likely to buy in and get it on their own?
Depends on the person. Some people will be like, oh yeah, I'm totally gonna get those. And then you see them in your follow-up appointment, they're like, yeah, I totally forgot, or
Yeah.
no, I didn't want to spend the money. But
Mhm.
both zinc and magnesium are really cheap. I mean, a typical bottle is going to run you of zinc or magnesium is going to run you probably between $10 and $12. and will last you about a month or so. If you're taking the correct dosage versus what the bottle says, maybe a little bit less. For men, for example, we need a little bit more magnesium than the 200 or 250 milligrams that is recommended on the bottle. But yeah, I mean, once people get the taste of what magnesium does for them, because so many people, it's the second most efficient micronutrient after vitamin D. So once people take it, I think, and they feel the effect of it, a lot of them are hooked, and they say they can't live without it. It's just because magnesium's hard to get. But yeah, I would say it just depends on the person.
Yeah, definitely. Good to know. Good to know. So anything else on supplements? Again, that's kind of like a rabbit hole type of deal. But anything else
Mm-hmm.
that you have to say on that?
I mean, shoot, I could get into so many more supplements. And when we talk about specific injury protocols, like, we can get into more, but yeah, a rabbit hole that we could get stuck in for hours.
Okay. Okay, cool. Let's move on. So this last part, we're just going to talk about a lot of the common injuries that we see in our current setting, and then maybe some things that we've talked about, like long-term rehab, ACL, things that we've talked about on this podcast before. So with our current setting, military setting, most of our injuries are just those overuse injuries. So all the running, the rucking, and then just the wear and tear of their normal work day, always being on their feet, always lifting, moving around. So, what are some things that we need to focus on in regards to nutrition for those overuse type injuries?
Yeah, typically overuse injury in my eyes is a problem with energy balance versus what the demands of their either duty or day or exercise is. Most soldiers eating too little for what they're doing, and if you're not giving yourself enough energy or enough nutrients to be able to rebuild what you're breaking down, at some point something's going to break. So a lot of those overuse injuries, we just feed them more. Say, hey, where can we get some more food in? And then more match their energy intake. And a really good way is sometimes just calculating out what their needs are based on their activity, and then kind of walking through what their day typically looks like, and then calculating out what that looks like, and showing them like, yeah, you're in a very typical one I see is you're in a 1 to 2,000 calorie deficit. This kind of makes sense, right? When you think about it like that, and like, oh shoot, like, yeah, I really need to be eating more. That's a big one. And then I would say the second big thing is protein needs. Like I said, protein, very satiating, expensive. So when we look at protein needs, typically they're not getting enough in order to be able to rebuild those tissues. I mean, even when we look at the structure of bones, a lot of it is minerals specifically, but a lot of the fibers within it are built out of proteins. So making sure we're getting enough energy and enough protein, and typically that helps resolve most overuse issues, I'd say.
Yeah. So it all goes back to that period or the pyramid that we talked about at the very
Mm-hmm.
beginning, the energy balance and protein, right? So as long
Absolutely.
as you're living a good life and making sure that you're taking care of that stuff, hopefully those overuse injuries aren't piling up.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned it a little bit, bone stress injuries. That's another huge thing. In addition to those overuse injuries, we see a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the bone stress injuries, stress fractures, stress
Mm-hmm.
reactions. What do we need to think about in regards to nutrition that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm going to go through the same progression because a lot of the times it is the same things. And that's why I told you earlier, I wanted to start with, more general, because a lot of them end up being the same things. Bone stress injuries, I would say, again, energy balance is one of those big things. If your body doesn't have enough energy, right? Then you can't rebuild what's being broken down. Same with protein, right? Again, protein, part of the bone matrix. You need that in order to rebuild those. And then when we get to bones, I think we do get a little bit more into the nitty gritty with micronutrients, vitamin D being the biggest one. I know you guys do a lot of testing for this. We'll put some in every here and there. But yeah, vitamin D, the most deficient micronutrient in the world. There's literally billions of people who are vitamin D deficient. And you'll see when we pull labs, how low sometimes they are, sometimes in the single digits, when we really want to be above 40 milligrams per deciliter. And so vitamin D is going to be a big one. Once we get that up, sometimes they resolve. Vitamin D is needed in order to be able to pull calcium into the bloodstream in order to deliver it to where we need to go. So that being said, calcium and phosphorus are the two nutrients that make up most of bone. I believe between the two, it's almost 99%, somewhere in there. And then in lesser amounts, we're looking at things like magnesium, sodium, potassium that also make up those. Sodium and potassium, usually you're getting enough at least in order to fix the bone matrix. And magnesium, again, if we're supplementing that just for general health, boom, you already got the benefits of a higher bone density from that as well.
Yeah, the vitamin D is huge. Like you said, we order labs. So anytime that somebody comes in with an increase in running volume, lower leg pain, like shin pain, foot pain, metatarsal pain, even like vague random hip pain from like a significant increase in running or rucking volume, one of the first things that we do is check their vitamin D levels.
Mm-hmm.
Because a common theme that we see is everyone is very low. In our population right now, they're always wearing sleeves, right? So they don't get a lot of that
Mm-hmm.
sunlight. So that's something
Sleeves and
that's,
hats
yeah, sleeves and
too.
hats. They don't get that sunlight. So that's something that's been huge for me over the last 2 years and working in this setting because in team sports, I didn't really see a lot of the same bone stress injuries that I do here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. With this population and how much clothes they're literally made to wear,
Hmm.
and they also work inside a lot, even in like the motor pools or whatever, wherever they're at. I mean, they're usually in a bay or something, so not exposed to the sun.
Yeah, I think that's super important for PTs or strength conditioning coaches working in the military setting, or even like the cross country,
Mm-hmm.
like long distance running. They definitely need to understand how vitamin D works and why it's important for those bone injuries.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so moving on, we did talk about collagen a little bit, and that plays a role in like the tendinopathy. So what do we
Mm-hmm.
need to think about for the chronic tendon pain that's not improving?
Yeah, I mean tendinopathy and any kind of a pain like that, typically inflammation driven. So again, I'm going to start with the big rocks in the jar that you need to fill in first. Appropriate calorie intake and protein intake for their needs and their body size is always going to be right. At the end of the day, you still need building blocks to be able to repair things, and energy to be able to go through the processes of repairing things. But inflammation driven process, there's a lot of different things that you can do. I touched on the omega 3s earlier, and I'd like to start there since we already talked about it. But balancing the omega 3s that you're getting, which again is just a type of fatty acid or fat, versus omega 6. Omega 6 being the pro-inflammatory, omega 3 being the anti-inflammatory. Omega 3s, like I said, we're getting from fish oils. You get them mostly from fish, especially the ones that really are involved in this process. There's 3 omega 3s. Two of them you can only get from fish oils, salmon, mackerel, albacore tuna is probably the most common source of them, although it's not the biggest source of them. Um, and getting more of those versus getting less of those pro-inflammatory omega 6 fatty acids coming from processed cookies, pastries, and other things like that. In America, we typically get a 20-to-1 ratio. There's actually been studies on this 20-to-1 ratio of omega 6 to omega 3. So 20 times more omega 6s than we're getting omega 3s. If we can get that down to 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, that's really where we see some more optimal outcomes from it. I will say though, that's really, really difficult to achieve. And usually it's from the side of the omega 6s that make it so hard. Like I said, omega 3s are hard to get no matter how you slice it. But reducing the amount of omega 6s in our diet, those are going to be the biggest source of inflammation that we're getting. And one source of omega 6 that I want to tack on there is soybean oil, which, if we look at a lot of the dressings that we're getting or a lot of the food, like pre-cooked food products or fried products that we're looking at these days or getting from the stores, a lot of them are cooked in soybean oil because it is so cheap to produce. And if you look at your cabinet and you see vegetable oil and you look on the back, more than likely it's going to say it's like 7 different oils because they like to say that, but a lot of it is going to be soybean oil, which is very high in omega 6 fatty acids, versus something like a canola oil, which typically is not great for cooking with, or avocado oil, which is great for cooking with, but it's expensive. I go with canola because it's kind of mid-tier, but it's really cheap to go with, and budget does matter.
Yeah.
So
That's good to know because it's easy to
mm-hmm.
overdo like the dressings and things like that. It's easy to just put a lot on there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Especially, when I have a salad, I want to drench it. So I'm
Yeah.
right there with you.
No, that's good. That's good. Anything else with the tendinopathy?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about a ton of things. The other things, I would say the polyphenols from fruits and vegetables, that's a huge one. I've seen some numbers like more than 1,000 milligrams per day. Nobody's out there measuring their polyphenols that they're getting. Again, just a wide variety of fruits and vegetables is fine. And just getting them in every single meal that you have. If you can get some additional ones in the day. So that's great. And let's do that. There's also curcuminoids, which is the active ingredient in turmeric. Turmeric itself is only about 2 to 3% curcuminoids. So it is useful to get a specific supplement that is curcuminoids. And that has some anti-inflammatory benefits. I wouldn't say it's like the end all be all. Like I said, calories, protein, omega-3s and polyphenols, you're probably going to get most of the bang for your buck right there. And then we talked about collagen before, and we can refer to that section for that.
Yeah, definitely. And then if PTs are listening, tendons need load, right? Heavy, slow resistance training.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
learning that myself because I
yeah,
got some tendinopathy.
yeah, for sure. BFR and heavy, slow resistance training.
Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah, not fun. All right. So last one right here. What do we need to think about in terms of post-op patients, especially those long-term rehab, like ACL, shoulder, labrum
Mhm.
repair, or rotator cuff repair, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. If we break it into phases, I think it's really easy to understand like what we're kind of chasing in terms of nutrition intervention. The first phase, right, being that right immediate post-op acute phase, whatever you want to call it, is we're just managing kind of the recovery from the surgery. We're trying to eat as much as we can, but especially if people are on pain medicine or something, maybe they have some gastroparesis, slowing of the intestines and intestinal mobility, then maybe we're not super hungry. So just trying to get in what we can, rest and recover. We're not super focused on nutrition. Of course, we'd like to get as much as we can in, but let the person live and breathe. And they just had, potentially something a little bit traumatic happen. If we when we move into phase 2 or like a subacute, and that's really where we want to start focusing on nutrition and building a good regimen of what we're both eating and what we're supplementing with. I'm assuming this is probably when people are, starting their physical therapy, and we can begin also timing meals and supplementation up with those sessions. I'm assuming this is probably about 3 days post-op, I guess, depending on what the surgery is, 3 to 7 days. That's really where we can start ramping up what we're focused on within nutrition. After that, I would say we're probably entering more of kind of like the bulk of the recovery. Phase 3, here we just want to make sure that we're building consistency, making sure that although the subacute phase is done and you feel like got most of the recovery there or whatever, making sure that the intake stays really, really good. And then this is where we can start dialing in, right? Like we focused on those first things first, which is calories, protein, maybe macronutrient distribution. But now, okay, how can we add in some more vegetables or more different colored vegetables? And maybe we can start switching things up, and you have your routine, but let's add here, or, try to kind of diversify across the board. Also, making sure fiber intake is really good, especially if they're on any pain medication. And I guess this goes for before as well, because of that gastroparesis that you get from painkillers, making sure that they're having proper digestion and bowel movements. We want that stuff moving through because they're going to start to feel really, really full if they're not moving things out on the opposite side. And then I guess after that, it's return to play. At that point, we're really just trying to ramp up energy needs to the increasing demands of their physical therapy, and then of course whatever activities that they're cleared for, half practice or full practice, getting back to full functionality. And I think also for those athletes or service members who may have really dialed in their nutrition and their physical therapy and really want to recover to their best ability, not regressing their choices back to whatever their pre-injury diet or routines were if they were worse, and maybe that's something that contributed to the injury in the first place.
Yeah, I mean that's great. I think something that's really helped us, especially for these longer term rehabs, is setting that foundation. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
we're lucky enough to see them before surgery, I know I've referred a couple people to you before surgery just to
Mm-hmm.
help them get that good base and understanding of what they need going in, because then they
Mm-hmm.
already know what to expect the first day after surgery, that subacute phase, and then so on. So I think having a good relationship back and forth between us and our patients has definitely helped smooth out that process.
Absolutely. And a lot of them have well, especially service members have some
Mhm.
bad habits in terms of their nutrition that may have led them to that point. So being able to build up and improve those can even help the surgery go better. If they're better fueled up for the surgery, they may just see better post-op recovery right out of the gate. So there's definitely
Yeah.
important things to get going.
Yeah, for sure. And a common term in physical therapy is back to prior level of function, but
Mm.
that prior level of function is what got them here in the first place, right? So we need to be better than
Better.
that. Better physically, better with nutrition and just lifestyle factors overall.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah. All right. So as we close up here, what are the big things that the listeners need to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say number one, energy intake is king, right? At the end of the day, like you can get in a lot of fruits and vegetables and be getting micronutrients, but if you're not getting energy, your body doesn't have what it needs. Again, I'm not downplaying the need for micronutrients. I just want to upplay the ability to take in the right amount of energy day in and day out. After that, I say macronutrient intake is queen, right? After you have the right amount of energy, can we distribute it properly between protein, carbohydrates, and fat to get the most bang for our buck, whether that's for performance or injury recovery? One thing I say to pretty much everybody I work with is if I ask a question, fiber is probably the answer. I think fiber is super downplayed as a nutrient in and of itself, really inversely correlated with all-cause mortality. The more you eat, the less likely you are to die. That's as simply as it gets. So eat a lot of high fiber foods. That includes your veggies. We were right when we were talking about it in kindergarten, and what your mom said is true. Eat your veggies. You need them. You need a wide variety of them, different colors, different textures, whatever it is, just different ones. Mix them in. And I think if I could wrap this all up with one thing, it's don't listen to people on TikTok or IG influencers, unless, of course, they're dietitians. And, not saying everybody's a great practitioner, and I don't want to say I am. I'll be humble for this moment here. I'm not usually, but yeah, just be careful with the information you listen to. Stay consistent with what you know is correct. The big things filling up that jar are going to be a lot more important than the water that tops it all off at the end of the day, which may be something like supplements, for example. I would say just put earmuffs on when you're listening on TikTok. Scroll right past anything that's trying to sell you something or some IG or whatever influencer.
Nice. No, that's great. I mean, this has been super impactful podcast. This is pretty much everything I've learned over the past year and a half, 2 years of knowing you. So, I mean, I'll probably listen to this again in a couple of weeks just to make sure I understand it. But if someone wants to get in touch with you or learn more about what you're doing, how can people find you?
Yeah, I'm not huge on social media anymore, but my IG is at Trevor Lomax, Trevor, last name Lomax. Feel free to follow. I don't really post a lot, but send me a message if you have any questions or if I can do anything.
Okay, sounds good. I mean, I'll put that in the show notes, and if anyone reaches out to me, I'll send them in your direction.
Sounds great.
All right. So I appreciate you hopping on. It's been blessed. I'll probably see you tomorrow at work.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
having me and
All
see you
right.
then.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Athlete's First Performance Podcast. If you have any questions regarding this episode or future episodes, please be sure to reach out on social media or our website. Both links can be found in the show notes.